friends and fellow students on the path. You are not here by accident. You have been drawn to this room, to this very moment, not by the personality speaking, but by a deep, inner hunger for something the world cannot give. A hunger for substance, for reality. I would like to speak with you tonight not about a man, but about a journey, not about a human biography, but about a divine alchemy. We gather to contemplate the story of a traveling salesman, a man entangled in the very web of lack, limitation, and material pursuit that defines the human scene. He mapped out his life on a ledger sheet, believing that profit and loss were the only realities. But then something happened. A crack appeared in the wall of his personal sense. A light, which had always been there, began to be perceived from within. The traveling salesman, who thought his purpose was to move goods from one city to another, discovered he was on a different journey entirely. A journey inward, to the very center of his own being, where he met not a salesman but the Christ. Tonight, we shall trace this sacred transition, from the one who sought his fortune out there, in the markets of the world, to the one who discovered it was already established within him as his very own consciousness. We will explore how this transformation is not a unique event locked in the past, but a living, breathing possibility for every single one of us, right here, right now. So, I invite you to settle in, not to hear a history lesson, but to witness a blueprint for your own awakening. For the journey of the salesman who became a mystic is, in truth, the only journey that ever truly matters. Why, and if the message you hear tonight stirs that same hunger for truth within you, if it feels like a key turning in a long, locked door, then I ask you to join this unfolding work. As like this video to share this light with other seekers, subscribe to this channel to continue this journey together, and in the comments below, simply write the number 11, a symbol of completion and spiritual perfection, a silent acknowledgement that you too are ready to move beyond the ledger sheet and into the infinite. Of course, here is the expansion of your first keynote, continuing directly from the flow of the introduction and written in the specified style. And so we begin where he began, not in the rarefied air of the mountaintop, but in the crowded, noisy marketplace of human experience. The world of the traveling salesman is one we all know intimately, for it is the world of the Adam dream, the world of effect. It is a world built entirely upon the testimony of the senses, a world where reality is measured in inventory and mileage, in commissions earned and quotas met. This is the realm of the outer, the world of getting and achieving, of lack and fulfillment. It is a life lived on a horizontal plane, where success is a destination always on the horizon, and security is a fragile thing built on the shifting sands of the economy, the whims of customers, and the strength of one's own personal will. In this world, God is a distant concept, perhaps a subject for Sunday, but not a living presence in the Tuesday afternoon sales call. The power is seen as being out there, in the territory, in the product, in the personality of the salesman himself. It is a life of profound loneliness. Though one is never alone, a life of quiet desperation masked by the constant motion and the chatter of negotiation. This is the great illusion, the veil that hangs before the eyes of all humanity. We are all, in some form, traveling salesmen, believing that our sustenance, our identity, and our peace must be procured from a world outside of ourselves. We are bartering with the universe, offering our effort, our time, our cleverness, in the hope of a good return. We are looking for the divine in the spectacular, waiting for God to appear in the burning bush, all the while unaware that the ground upon which the salesman stands is itself holy. This entire panorama of seeking and striving is the dream from which we must awaken. It is not a sinful world, but an illusory one, a world of shadows mistaking themselves for substance. The ledger book becomes the measure of a man's worth, and the road ahead, with its promise of a better tomorrow, becomes the sole object of faith. But this outer world, for all its apparent solidity, has no permanent foundation. It is a world of pairs of opposites. profit and loss, health and sickness, success and failure, and to be bound to it is to be subject to its inevitable tides. The transformation, the great awakening, does not begin with a new set of beliefs to be added to the old. It does not begin with the salesman simply becoming a more spiritual businessman. It begins with the shattering of the old foundation. It begins when the meticulously maintained world of effect, the world he has spent a lifetime building, starts to reveal its essential emptiness. The striving itself becomes wearying. The achievements, once tasted, reveal a lingering hollowness. The answers the world provides no longer satisfy the depth of the question that is now stirring within. This is the necessary, blessed crisis. It is the first faint tremor of the earthquake that will, in time, topple the entire edifice of the personal sense, not to leave him in ruins, but to reveal the eternal, indestructible temple that was there all along, hidden beneath the fragile structures of his own making. And it is precisely at this point of exhaustion, at this moment when the well of personal effort has run utterly dry, that the crack appears. This is not a cataclysmic event heralded by thunder, it is a subtle, yet irrevocable, shift in perception. It is the dawning realization that the problem is not a lack of effort, but the very nature of the effort itself. The foundation of the personal life, the I that has been striving and managing and fearing, is revealed to be insubstantial. This crack is the failure of the human picture to satisfy, and it is the greatest blessing that can befall an individual, for it is the first genuine glimpse of something beyond it. The personal sense, which is the totality of the salesman's identity, is that which feels itself to be a separate entity navigating a hostile or indifferent world. It is the sense of I that believes it must think its own thoughts, generate its own wisdom, and manufacture its own supply through its own labor and cunning. This I is the architect of the entire dream, and its entire experience is confined within the walls of its own creation. But when the crack appears, a light not of this world begins to seep in. It is not a light that illuminates the old objects more brightly. It is a light of an entirely different nature, which reveals the objects themselves to be shadows. This is the beginning of what we might call divine discontent, a holy dissatisfaction with the offerings of the world. The things that once brought a sense of accomplishment now feel empty. The solutions that once resolved a crisis now seem temporary and superficial. The crack is the failure of form to provide substance. It is the moment the salesman, in the midst of his rounds, stops and truly inquires, "Is this all there is?" This question, asked not as a casual lament, but as a deep, soul-wrenching prayer, is the opening. It is the surrender of the no, how, the relinquishment of the belief that he knows the way. The personal I is being humbled, not by an outside force, but by the sheer weight of its own inherent limitation. This is not self-deprecation, it is the most profound and realistic assessment of the situation. It is the recognition that the power to truly heal, to truly prosper, to truly achieve lasting peace has never resided in the personal self. This crack, therefore, is not a destruction, but a preparation. It is the ploughing of the hard, packed soil of human consciousness to receive a new seed. The noise of the outer world begins to recede, not because the world has changed, but because a new faculty of listening is being born. The traveler is becoming still. He is no longer striving to reach a destination, but is beginning to prepare for arrival. The hunger is no longer for a better set of circumstances, but for a different source of life itself. The crack is the opening through which the Christ, the individual's own divine reality, which has been present all along, can begin to make itself known. It is the thin place in the veil where the hum of the eternal begins to be audible over the din of the temporal. The salesman is not adding a new piece of knowledge to his collection. He is standing at the threshold of an entirely new kingdom, the kingdom of his own being. This new faculty of listening, this inner stillness born of a surrendered personal will, is the antechamber to the most sacred experience a human being can know. It is here, in this profound and holy silence, that the outer seeking ceases and the inner revelation begins. We have called this the inner altar, but it is not a physical place one can locate on a map. It is a state of consciousness, a turning within so complete that the entire external universe recedes into its proper place as a shadow and an effect. The traveling salesman, accustomed to finding his solutions in the next city, with the next client, through the next transaction, now discovers that the only journey of any consequence is the journey into the depths of his own being. This is not an intellectual exercise, not a form of psychological introspection. It is a direct, unmediated turning to the very source of one's own awareness. It is the I seeking the I am. At this inner altar, the bargaining and the striving of the human scene fall away. There are no petitions to be made, for in this sacred silence, one realizes that the Father knows our need before we even become conscious of it. The practice at this altar is not one of asking, but of listening. It is a waiting upon God, a conscious stilling of the mind's chatter, the heart's anxieties, and the will's designs, to make room for the divine impulse. It is a state of receptivity, of pure yielding, where the individual consciousness becomes a transparency through which the divine can flow. This is where the power is. This is the point of contact where the illusion of a separate, powerless human self is dissolved in the conscious awareness of a single, omnipresent life, which is both the source and the substance of all that is. At this altar, one does not find a new set of rules to live by, nor a new set of metaphysical principles to replace the old commercial ones. One finds a presence, one finds a palpable, living reality that takes over the government of our lives. The wisdom that is revealed is not stored up for future use, it is spontaneous, specific, and immediately applicable to the need of the moment. The supply that is realized is not a quantity of things, but an infinite, ever-available source of substance and idea. The healing that takes place is not a manipulation of a physical condition, but the recognition of a spiritual fact that then manifests as harmony on the outer plane. This is the great transition from being a human being trying to reach God, to being the very activity of God individualized. The inner altar is the point of that individualization. It is where the Word becomes flesh in your experience. It is where you stop reflecting a light from an external source and become the point from which the light itself emanates. The salesman who once sought his good in the marketplace now sits in consciousness at the very center of the universe, and from that center all things are added. The outer world does not disappear, it is transformed. It is no longer a source of threat or an arena for personal achievement. It becomes the living proof, the inevitable expression of the harmony realized at the inner altar. The clients, the transactions, the travels, all of it is now imbued with a new purpose. They are no longer the goal, but the incidental fruit of a life lived from this sacred center. The journey is over, because the traveler has arrived at his own self, and has discovered that his own self is the destination he was always seeking. This conscious arrival at the center of one's own being brings with it the most radical and liberating revelation of all, the final, unequivocal understanding that God is the only operator. This is the truth that shatters the last vestiges of the personal sense, for it transfers the entire weight of responsibility, initiative, and action from the individual to the divine. The I that once believed it was the salesman, the planner, the negotiator, the healer, now realizes its true function is that of a witness and a transparency. It is not that the human scene ceases to exist, but that the interpretation of it is utterly transformed. You no longer see a world of independent actors and separate events, but a single, divine activity unfolding in infinite form. The person you speak to is not merely a client, but the very activity of God appearing as that individual in that moment for a holy purpose. The transaction is not a personal achievement, but a specific manifestation of the infinite flow of divine substance. The healing that occurs is not your personal victory over a disease, but the inevitable emergence of the harmony that is the eternal and only reality once the belief in a power apart from God is removed. This is the realization that there are not two powers, God and you, spirit and matter, good and evil, coexisting and struggling for dominance. There is only the one, the single I am, appearing as the infinite variety of the universe. Your own sense of I is not a separate entity looking at God, but is, in its purity, the very point where God is being individual, expressed, and known. Therefore, the life you are living is not your life to live, but God's life being lived as you. The work you are doing is not your work to accomplish, but God's work being performed through the instrument of your consciousness and your hands. This is the end of the burden of the world. This is the release from the agonizing pressure of having to make things happen, of having to solve every problem, of having to secure your own future. Your entire practice shifts from one of management to one of recognition. You are not here to change a world of error, but to recognize the spiritual universe that is already fully present, here and now, beneath the illusory veil of the senses. You walk through the same world, but you see with new eyes. You hear with new ears. Where once you saw a problem, you now see an opportunity for the divine activity to reveal itself. Where once you heard a demand, you now hear a call for the recognition of the Christ in your fellow man. You are no longer a traveler on the road, but the very road itself upon which the divine activity is moving. Your consciousness becomes the point of contact where the unconditioned, formless infinite takes form as the specific, tangible good required in the situation. This is not a passive state, it is the most dynamic activity conceivable. But it is an activity in which you are not the actor, but the instrument. You are the flute through which the divine melody is played. You are the prism through which the pure white light of spirit passes to appear as the specific colors of your daily experience. The personal sense, the old salesman, has not been improved. He has been utterly displaced by the conscious awareness of the one I am. This conscious displacement of the personal I, by the divine I am, marks the final, irrevocable stage of the journey from outer seeking to inner awareness. The transformation is now complete. The man who once traversed the country with a sample case, his eyes fixed on the horizon of the next sale, now moves through the same world, but his gaze is turned inward, fixed upon the infinite source from which all form proceeds. The seeking is over, not because all questions have been intellectually answered, but because the seeker has been found to be the sought. The awareness itself has become the object of its own contemplation, and in that profound realization it discovers itself to be one with the all. The outer world, which once seemed so solid, demanding, and real, is now perceived for what it is, a panorama of effects. It is the visible expression, the shadow, of the invisible substance of consciousness. He no longer goes off to the world to get anything, for he understands that he must bring everything as to the world from this inner sanctuary of awareness. His supply is not in his bank account, but in his conscious oneness with the source of all substance. His health is not in his body, but in his abiding in the truth that his body is the temple of the living God, a temporary form animated by immortal spirit. His relationships are not for personal gratification, but are holy encounters where the Christ in him acknowledges the Christ in the other. This is the life of continuous communion. It is a state of abiding, not of visiting. The inner altar is no longer a place he goes to in meditation. It is the very ground of his being from which he never departs. He walks, talks, and conducts his business from this center. The human scene continues with all its apparent challenges and complexities, but it is now met with a different faculty. The human mind, with its limited reasoning and its storehouse of past experiences, is no longer the primary instrument of navigation. It has been superseded by a spiritual discernment, an inner knowing that arises spontaneously from the depths of his being. This is the still, small voice, the divine intuition that knows the truth about every situation, a truth that the senses can never report. A problem in business is no longer a crisis to be solved by personal cunning. It is an invitation to go within and witness the divine activity manifest as the perfect solution. A physical discomfort is not a signal for panic, but a reminder to turn to the truth of his being, to recognize the body as an idea in mind, forever whole and perfect. This is the practice of the presence of God. It is not an intermittent prayer, but a constant, living attitude. It is the awareness that the same I Am that appeared as Moses at the burning bush, that spoke through the prophets, and that was witnessed in the grace of the Christ Jesus, is the very same I Am of your own being. There is no separation, no distance, no hierarchy. You are not a human being reaching up to a distant God. You are the individualized expression of God itself. The journey, therefore, was always an illusion. You were never a salesman trying to become a mystic. You were, and are, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And the entire journey was the process of the personal self wearing itself out until it could no longer obscure the brilliant, eternal reality of what you have always been. The outer activity may continue. The conversations, the work, the interactions, but it is all now seen as the dance of the One, and you are not a dancer in the dance, you are the dance itself. And so we arrive at the ultimate, glorious destination of this entire journey, the conscious realization of your inherent Christ identity. This is the final unveiling, the moment when the seeker dissolves into the sought, and you come to understand that the mystical state Joel Goldsmith described is not a special condition reserved for a spiritual elite, but the hidden truth of your own being, waiting only for your recognition. The Christ is not a person who lived 2,000 years ago. That was Jesus, the individual who so fully embodied this universal Christ principle that he became its perfect transparency. The Christ is the truth of you. It is the divine sonship, the pure spiritual consciousness, the I Am that was before Abraham was the unconditioned, immortal, and perfect idea of God that constitutes your true selfhood. This is not a new self you must strive to build, but the eternal self that has always been, obscured only by the false education of the senses and the arrogant claims of the personal I. To know this is to be free. It is to look upon the world not from the limited, vulnerable vantage point of a human personality, but from the perspective of the divine mind itself, where your Christ identity is the lens of spiritual discernment through which you perceive the substance where others see only form. You perceive harmony where others see disease, and you perceive abundance where others see lack. It is the rock upon which you build a life immune to the storms of the human scene, for it exists in a realm those storms cannot touch. Living from this identity requires no struggle, only a constant, gentle yielding of the belief that you are a separate, mortal self. It is a continuous putting off of the old man and putting on of the new, which is, in reality, a matter of remembering what you have always been. Your work is to abide in this knowing. When a sense of fear or lack arises, you do not fight it as a personal enemy. You turn within and affirm the truth. The Christ in me is my abundance. The Christ in me is my safety. The Christ in me is my peace. You are not creating this truth. You are aligning your consciousness with the eternal fact of your being. The power is not in the words, but in the conscious realization behind them, the realization that you are one with the Father, and that all that the Father has is yours, here and now. This is the pearl of great price. This is the treasure hidden in the field of human consciousness. The traveling salesman had to sell all that he had, the entire inventory of his personal beliefs, his reliance on his own prowess, his faith in the outer world, to buy that field and claim the treasure. And the treasure was himself. It is you. Your Christ identity is the healer, the provider, the weight shower, and the liberator. It needs no assistance from the personal mind, only its non-interference. It is the light that shines in the darkness. What is the darkness? The ignorance of the human mind has not overcome it, cannot comprehend it, and ultimately must yield to its radiant, eternal presence. This is the end of seeking, for you have found yourself. This is the end of becoming, for you acknowledge your eternal being. This is the peace that passes all human understanding, for it is the peace of God established in you, as you, forever.